Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation, not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today I'm going to be talking about the subject of movies based on shows. This is mostly going to be focused on movies where they're actually connected to the show's lore. It's not going to be like, okay, this is kind of like a reboot, like any of those live action movies where it's like, oh look, the animated show came to the real world, unless it's directly connected to the show in some way. But pretty much something like the Smurfs, where it's like, okay, it's based on a show, of course, well, technically based on comics, but a lot of people know it as a show, and they came to the real world. Not focused on those. I am mostly focused on stuff like what this series started with. Stuff like Transformers the movie, the Powerpuff Girls movie, Bob's Burgers movie, the Simpsons movie, or even the anime stuff where you have movies like Dragon Balls, like the Dragon Ball Z stuff, whether it's the ones that were canon, like the superhero, Battle of Gods, or the earlier stuff like Dead Zone, The Trio of Might, or just any of those type of movies. You also had, of course, your Sailor Moon movies. Didn't really watch most of those, so I'm not going to bother, but just generally speaking, that kind of stuff. This has, of course, been a common thing within the show, movies based on shows, and I just figured, like, okay, let's talk about my general feelings about these things. I've shared it before, but just to kind of gather it in one place, this is where it's at. Before going any further, I just want to remind you, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, like the video, and go ahead and even give a comment. If you enjoy it a lot, ring that bell. And for those of you who are just listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever, make sure to add this show to your list. So obviously, I'm not going to be focused on a specific thing this episode, and that's perfectly fine. Generally speaking, I'm iffy when it comes to movies based on shows, because my general feeling on a lot of these is that I like having movies where anyone can jump in. I can't say that I'm against, stuff like sequels or, adaptations or anything like that. But normally speaking, the better ones usually have it where you can enjoy it even if you've never seen a single episode. I mean, me personally, one of the best examples of this was the Beavis and Butthead movie, Do America, where as a kid I was not a big fan of Beavis and Butthead because I just thought they were two annoying idiots, which they kind of are, but the quality of the writing was not what I expected. I thought it was literally just, here's these characters who are always very stupid, doing stupid things. And then it turned out like, okay, so there is kind of a level of humor in there that I did not expect, which is basically that throughout the show, you got people who overestimate Beavis and Butthead's intelligence. And as a result, it's kind of like, well, who's the real idiot here? The person who clearly sees idiots right in front of them and thinking that it's all part of some plan or some trick or something like that, or the people who are straight up idiots. When it comes to the movie, again, I never really seen it. I'd seen the show. I got into it because I thought, like, okay, the premise sounded kind of funny. Like, okay, so these guys are looking for their TV. And, of course, years of people saying, like, no, it's actually good. I was like, okay, fine, I'll, break down. I'll watch the Beavis and Butthead movie. I mean, even on the cover, it had, like, 2 thumbs up from, like, Roger Ebert and, Gene Siskel, which used to mean a lot. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, I'll give it a shot. There has to be something there for people to be liking it this much. And, yeah, surprise, surprise. Even though I've never had, at that point, had never seen a single episode of Beavis and Butthead, didn't really matter. It was fully enjoyable, even if of course, I hadn't watched a single episode, because it told a clear story with characters, regardless of it. Like, it wasn't devolving into fan service the way some of these do. Of course, years later, they finally did a sequel, which was Beavis and Butthead Through the Universe. That one, I feel, still works, even if you're not a fan, but of course, it's harder to say now that I am more aware of it. But it does have a little bit more of a fan service. Like there's a bit early on where you see a few characters cameo, but it's not in your face. It's just one of those quick things where it's like, okay, if you're a fan of the show, you'll know who exactly that is that's reacting this way. In movie, it just comes off like, okay, so these are just people who I guess know them. But yeah, overall, that kind of stuff always works. And then you have stuff where it's like, okay, yeah, this is more heavily reliant on you being a fan of these things. Which I hate to say it, but it's often more on the anime side than it is on the American side or just Western side in general. Much as I enjoyed the Dragon Ball movies, especially the ones that Toriyama was actually involved with, a lot of them still have a lot of story beats where it's like, okay, if you have never watched this stuff, you're going to be a bit lost. It doesn't completely ruin it for me, but I generally just don't like it as much because it always feels like, okay, this is a little distracting. Now I have to think about, like, oh yeah, this is what happened there, this is what happened here, just so I can understand the plot line. And overall, it just ruins the whole feel of it, you know? It's like you're telling a good story, and as a result, you now have to have all these things intersecting into the story. It's not just that I had to follow the information that's being laid upon me. It's now that I have to remember information that happened years ago in a thing that I haven't watched in who knows how long, if I've watched it at all. And it's kind of like, it's almost like homework. It's distracting. It doesn't ruin it, of course. Like I said, if you're a fan of this stuff, you're gonna enjoy it enough where it's like, okay, it's fine. But I don't know. For me, it always kind of slows it down enough. I remember watching the One Piece movie. I think it was One Piece Red or something like that. I know it's one of the more recent movies where you had like the singer, and it was a very entertaining story. The singer is pretty much trying to trap a bunch of people on this island. A lot of them pirates, just to get rid of pirates from the world. There's a whole lot of drama in there. There's a lot of tragedy, lots of great music. But what ruined the experience a lot for me was that you had, like with Luffy, you had a bunch of these characters that had been introduced over the years. And fine, I'll admit that I haven't really followed One Piece since the introduction of Chopper, which I know is so long ago. But even with the characters that I already knew, it was still kind of ruined because the movie doesn't give a lot of these characters proper introductions. So it's like, okay, well, I know that these people are part of his crew, but beyond that, like, I don't know what are these characters about? Who are they? What do they do? So when they start doing things, start saying things that are a bit off, a bit weird, I just ended up feeling like, okay, what was that about? Not enough to ruin the movie, but at the same time, it was just like, okay, this is a little distracting. I don't know who this fish guy is. I guess he's part of the crew now, and then you'd get introduced to like other members of his expanded crew, because I guess over time he became like the leader of like a fleet or something like that. Look, if you're a fan of this stuff, of course I know that you'll enjoy it, but if you're coming into it just now, it's like, I don't know anything about it. And I don't know. I know some people are going to say like, well, that's kind of your problem for not knowing this stuff. But I'm like, look, when it comes to a movie, it's more widely available and it's more like, a story that's supposed to be self-contained. And if I'm still getting lost every now and then by what's going on, it just kind of hurts the experience. I shouldn't have to know like 1,000 episodes worth of knowledge, like, pretty much like character knowledge or whatever, just to enjoy this one single story. Like, it should be entertaining on its own right. And to be fair, like I said, I did enjoy the movie overall. I just feel like that much of it distracted it from being better than it could have been. Yeah, this isn't even true with stuff where I am fully aware of what's going on, where, like with the Dragon Ball, like I said again, like, because the stories have to, leave and explain, like, okay, this is what happened here, this is what happened in a few sagas, and that's kind of important to this. It just distracts from the experience, at least my experience. Like I said, I prefer when it's much more contained. I know one of the best examples of a self-contained movie based on the show is something like the Powerpuff Girls movie, but that's mostly because it's an origin story. Now, granted, a lot of origin stories still try to cram in a lot of references. The Powerpuff Girls is more restrained and does feel like, okay, if you haven't watched this, we're not basing a lot of the experience on just doing fan references, which isn't always the norm for a lot of these origin stories, like whether it's episodes or movies. But again, it's one of those things where it's like you're not guaranteed to always get that. Transformers movie, like I said, it was the first one that I did on this show. Might end up doing it again just to kind of reflect on it. That one was one where I felt like, okay, if you've never seen Transformers, it doesn't matter. There are characters that, of course, have been on the show, but again, it doesn't matter. It tells a clear story. Maybe not the greatest because it was clearly meant to sell toys, but even as I said back then, there is a lot of interesting stuff going on under the surface when it comes to that movie. Honestly, that Transformers has the tagline "More than meets the eye." It has always felt kind of appropriate because it's, on the one hand, a lot of it is very simple, surface level, stupid, BS. But whether by intention or just design of like what the idea is, these two warring factions, it's always felt like there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes underneath it, whether or not these people intended to have that meaning or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In the case of that movie, they definitely did not intend it to have a sort of mature tone with in regards to how a lot of characters dying led to essentially the story about two factions who were dealing with the loss of their leaders in different ways. Of course, sometimes it can be hard to say whether or not the story works, regardless if you're a fan or not, because you're already a fan. So it's like, I don't know, maybe the stuff that you think is easy to grasp is not as easy if you actually never watched it, but to your mind it does, just because it makes so much sense. Which is the case for something like the Simpsons movie, where on the one hand, I think the movie is funny enough and tells its own story just enough for it to float by if you've never seen the show at all. But then again, there are some jokes that are a bit fan servicey, some character interactions that are built on that kind of stuff where it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't think it's a problem, but at the same time, maybe it's only because I've already, been so into the show that I already know the relationships that these characters have and, the personalities that these characters have. So it's like, okay, it makes sense for them to be like this. Like, I don't know, does, not being a fan of the show make it easy to grasp that Mr. Burns is a horrible person? Or will it just be weird that this person who has all this power in this situation is not willing to, share it out? Like, of course, there are mean people that exist out there, but given the situation, you still kind of, it still leaves me to wonder whether or not people will fully accept this as just an easy answer. I think so, but you never know. And then you got something like Bob's Burgers, which I love the movie. I think it's one of the best movies based on a TV show. I feel it's very easy to grasp if you're not a fan of the show, but then again, you get those moments where it's like, okay, maybe this is something that is only easy to grasp because I've already seen the show enough so that it's fine. Like, you have at some point the kids basically interacting with one of the carnies, who they've met on the show numerous times. Does something like that make sense to the audience that haven't seen this show? Or are they going to be like, okay, so how do they now just suddenly know someone from there? And why one specific person? If they know someone, wouldn't they know multiple people or something like that? Like, I don't know if that's ever a question that pops up in people's minds who aren't fans of this stuff, but I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, as the way I feel the story is told well enough to where it won't matter to anyone who isn't a fan, but it could always have that potential. I don't know. I do think in that regard, the Western shows are stronger when it comes to their movies, that they're more welcoming. Also because, even if they don't bring a lot of the stuff up as much on their shows, I mean, you got a lot of these that have celebrity voice actors showing up, and it's not always people that can get back in the show, so it's a little awkward when they don't reference it. But then again, some of these are like their series finale or come right at the show is ending, so it doesn't really matter in the end. But I don't know. It at least always feels like it's part of that world to an extent, which is something that I can't say about anime movies, where a lot of them just feel like, yeah, these are clearly just side stories that have no connection to their world, which kind of drags it down because it just feels like, okay, well, there's no stakes here if we already know that the manga goes and continues from this, and nothing of this will ever matter. Like at the very least, even with TV shows, like I said with The Simpsons and whatnot, they'll occasionally reference something that happened in the movie, so it kind of tells you like, okay, so there is some weight here, regardless of whether or not things turn out bad or there is some big shock. Then again, on the other hand, the one thing I will hand it to anime adaptations is that they often feel just right for that world. Of course, they're clearly not actual connected material, but at the very least, they never feel like, okay, we're just doing this bigger story because we can. I can't remember who mentioned it. I think it was Seth MacFarlane back when there was a lot of talks of doing like a Family Guy movie. One of the things he was not interested in doing was a Save the World type story, which at that moment it kind of hit like, yeah, a lot of these TV show movies are end of the world kind of scenarios, which sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it's a bit weird. Like you'll have something like SpongeBob, for example, and I love the first two SpongeBob movies. The third one's kind of mixed. Um, and you'll have like, okay, so suddenly in the first movie, it's like, okay, Plankton now wants to rule the world, which yeah, he's had hints of that before, but he's like much more intent on being evil and being cruel compared to how he is like in the show. You got something like the Hey Arnold movie where it's like, oh yeah, we're now gonna destroy the whole place they live in to turn it into a mall. And it's like, where's all this type of story coming from? Like, it's not too out there, but at the same time, it always feels like we're doing this, like that's our only way to elevate the stakes, is just to create the scenario where the world is ending, or their world, like pretty much their town or whatever, is coming to a close. Which is one of the reasons why I like something like the Bob's Burgers movie, where the plot line is really just like, okay, well, the family just needs to find some way to pay the rent at the end of the month. There is some more intense stuff that happens, but it all feels natural from that. I mean, granted, this is a thing that I will say that it benefits when it's an action related show like Transformers, which is why it also tends to work with anime. But I feel like even with anime, they at least, like, even when it's more, I don't want to say more combat, since a lot of them are action based. It's hard to find an example off the top of my head. But I find a lot of them are just like, okay, this is just a simple thing, and it's continuing off of whatever the show is without going too over the top. So I'll give them that much, but I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it would be nice to see more shows based on more movies based on shows that acknowledge that the world of the show is not this action heavy end of the world scenario thing. You can do stories where it's just like, okay, well, this month, the characters have like a talent show, and that's what the movie is about. I would kind of prefer that, if they did more stuff like that, where it's like more character specific, more in tune to the world, instead of just going like, okay, well, we need to find some way to blow everything up. And if you have to, at least find a way where it feels natural to that world. It's not even really all that specific. At the end of the day, I do like, of course, movies based on anything. It doesn't really matter. And I think that a lot of these are interesting. It's just I wish some of these would understand, like, okay, you're not just making this for your audience now, you are making it for an audience outside of them. So do try to keep the plot line simple enough to where it makes sense for everyone. If it starts to feel like homework, maybe reconsider what you're telling. Anime definitely has to figure out how to introduce characters into their things, while making it more newcomer friendly. I feel. I know some anime fans will probably disagree with me. That's fine. I don't care. I just think that, from my perspective, it would be more beneficial because some of these are still really good movies on their own right, and they have some good stories, and it just kind of hurts that suddenly I have to know all these things, and it kind of prevents me from jumping in. Like, and that's one of the big things is like the fact that you're doing this movie based on the show means that there is going to be a wider audience because it's going to be something bigger. It's going to be something that's going to be playing in theaters and whatnot. So it's something that will attract people outside of the fandom looking at it. And if you guys focus on that and just kind of deters people from wanting to join in, whether it's because they ended up not liking it because they got confused by some of the stuff, or they just felt like, okay, well, I guess, there's no welcoming me. There's over a decade's worth of material probably in this show, and now I'm not gonna try to jump in if it gets this confusing to where it's hard to follow, even if you're doing this 90-minute story. I don't know, just the general way I feel. Overall, they're fun. Sometimes they're not. In any case, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you for coming on today. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel where you'll see video versions of these podcasts. And if you just want to listen to them, there's always the option of just following the podcast on their various sites, whether it's Spotify, Podbean, or Apple Podcasts. Whatever you choose, I hope you continue enjoying these. And if you want to support me even further than that, there's always the option of Patreon. And in any case, again, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.